Honestly, Eleanor, do you even know how to use a dishwasher? Just leave it to me before you break something. Brenda's voice cut through the hum of the enormous stainless steel refrigerator. She snatched the plate from my hand, her long painted nails clicking against the ceramic. I stood there in her vast white kitchen, a room so sterile it smelled like a doctor's office. I lived in the little guest house out back, a place I'd helped pay for. A hot flush of shame crept up my neck. I felt my hands tremble, so I clasped them behind my back. I was 72 years old. I had raised a son, buried a husband, and run a household for 50 years. And now I was being told I couldn't load a plate into a machine. I was just trying to help, I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. I know, she said, not looking at me. But this is a very expensive appliance. Let's not take any chances. I had nowhere else to go. My social security check wasn't enough for rent in this town, not anymore. My savings, my nest egg, were sunk into the down payment for this very house. So I just nodded and watched her arrange the dishes with sharp, angry movements. I retreated to my guest house, the sharp scent of Brenda's lemon disinfectant clinging to my sweater. The little cottage was my only refuge. It was neat and tidy, filled with my old things. The air inside smelled of my lavender soap and the faint, sweet perfume of old books. I walked over to the mantel and picked up the silver-framed photo of my late husband. George looked back at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners like they always did when he smiled. I traced the line of his jaw with my fingertip. "Oh, George," I whispered to the quiet room. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." I turned away from the photo and went to my own small kitchenette. I took out my favorite dish soap, the kind with the green apple scent. I filled the sink with warm, soapy water and began to wash the one coffee cup I had used that morning. The simple act of cleaning something, of being in control of my own small space, was the only thing that calmed the shaking in my hands. The next afternoon, my son, Mark, knocked on my door. He didn't come inside. He just stood on the little porch, shifting his weight from one foot to the other and staring at a spot over my shoulder. "Hey, Mum," he said. "Brenda put together a little list of things for you. If you have time." He handed me a piece of paper. It wasn't a list. It was an order sheet. Pick up Brenda's silk blouses from the dry cleaner. Go to the specialty pet store across town for the specific brand of dog food her poodle ate. The dog food I was allergic to. My throat always got tight and itchy if I was near the stuff for too long. "Of course, dear," I said, folding the paper. I felt more like his hired help than his mother. "Great. Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver," he said, already turning to leave. He never asked how I was feeling or if I needed anything. I unfolded the paper after he left. My eyes scanned the list of chores. At the very bottom, in Brenda's perfect, sharp handwriting, was one final instruction. It wasn't an errand, it was a command. "And please try to stay out from underfoot tomorrow. We're having important people over." I did as I was told. The next day, I stayed inside my little guest house, the windows closed tight. I could hear the party in the main house. Bursts of loud laughter and the clinking of glasses carried on the evening air. The sounds made my small cottage feel even more silent, more isolated. Brenda never brought me a plate of food. I knew she wouldn't. Around 8 o'clock, my stomach rumbled with a hollow ache. I opened my pantry and found a single can of tomato soup. I heated it on my little stove and ate it straight from the pot while standing at the counter. The soup tasted like tin and loneliness. Through my window, I could see the warm, festive lights of the main house. I watched the shadows of people moving around, their heads thrown back in laughter, and I felt a physical ache in my chest. It was a pain so deep, it felt like a bruise on my heart. The next morning, I went out to my small garden patch. It was the one thing that was truly mine, a little square of earth behind the guest house where I grew tomatoes and herbs. The smell of the damp soil and the green leaves always brought me a small measure of peace. My neighbour Carol, who was on the HOA board, often complimented my fat, red tomatoes. I was gently tying a heavy vine to a stake when Brenda came marching across the lawn. Her arms were crossed and her face was pinched with irritation. "Eleanor," she said, her voice sharp, "we need to talk about this mess." "My garden?" I asked, confused. "The Homeowners Association sent a notice," she said, not meeting my eyes. "They've had a complaint about your unsightly tomato plants. They say it lowers the tone of the neighborhood. You'll have to pull them all out." I looked from her face to my beautiful, thriving plants. I knew, with a certainty that settled cold and hard in my stomach, that she was lying. Carol would have told me herself, probably over a shared slice of my tomato pie. I picked up the old landline phone, the plastic cool against my cheek. I needed to hear a friendly voice. My friend Judith had moved to a retirement village in Florida 2 years ago, and I missed her something fierce. "Eleanor, is that you?" Her voice was like sunshine coming through the receiver. She told me all about her week. There was water aerobics on Monday, a book club on Tuesday, and a bus trip to the casino on Wednesday. "Oh, and our bingo night is a real cutthroat affair," she laughed. "You wouldn't believe the drama over a $20 gift card." I listened, picturing her in a bright, sunny room full of people. I was sitting in my dim guest house, the only sound the hum of the small refrigerator. A deep, painful ache settled in my chest. This was the life I was supposed to have. Judith must have heard something in my silence. "Eleanor, what happened to that nest egg George left you? The one he called your adventure fund?" After I hung up, her question echoed in the quiet room. The adventure fund. George had worked a second job for years to save it. It was supposed to be for cruises and trips to see the Grand Canyon. It was supposed to be for me. Most of it had gone into the down payment on this house. "It's a joint investment, Mom," Mark had said at the time. "This way we can all be together, and your money is secure in real estate." It had sounded so sensible then. I went to the little secretary desk where I kept my important papers. My hands started to tremble as I sifted through old bills and insurance statements. The folder was supposed to be right there, labeled House Agreement. But it was gone. All I found was an empty space between car title and medical. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I knew, just as sure as I knew my own name, that Brenda had moved it. I waited until Mark came by that evening to take out the trash. I tried to keep my voice light. "Mark, honey, have you seen the folder with the house paperwork? I can't seem to put my hands on it." He wouldn't look at me. He just kept his eyes on the overflowing trash bin. "Brenda probably organized it somewhere. She's been cleaning out the office. She's also been very critical lately," I said, the words feeling small and weak. He finally sighed and turned to me, his face tight with annoyance. "Mom, Brenda is just stressed. You know how she is. Please, just don't make waves." He picked up the trash bags, and the conversation was over. His dismissal hurt more than any of Brenda's insults. He had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. A week later, Brenda called a family meeting at the main house. She was beaming, a stack of festive-looking papers in her hand. "I've decided to take charge of Christmas dinner this year, to make it perfect." She handed me a printed schedule. It was a detailed, hour-by-hour plan for the week leading up to Christmas. I scanned the pages, looking for my name. I found it, listed several times. Under Monday, deep clean guest bathroom. Under Wednesday, Polish, all silver. Under Thursday, peel 10 pounds of potatoes. At the top of the page, she had listed committees. Her sister, who did nothing but criticize my cooking, was the decorating committee chair. My name was listed at the very bottom, next to a single heading, General Help. Just then, my old smartphone buzzed on the table. It was a notification for a new group chat. The group was called Family Fun Planners. I smiled, thinking it was for Christmas. How nice. I tapped the notification, ready to be helpful and show them I wasn't trying to make waves. The chat opened to the very last message, sent only seconds before. It was from Brenda, and I could see her sister's icon right above it. Her message was right there on the screen, clear as day. Just added the dusty relic so she sees the cleaning schedule. God, I hope she doesn't try to contribute any of her clueless ideas. My blood went cold. I held the phone in my hand, the screen glowing in the dim light of my little guest house. I scrolled up, and up, and up. Months of messages swam before my eyes. There was my name, Eleanor, over and over. A burden, a warden, a leech on their finances, Brenda had typed one night. They made fun of the cardigans I knitted. They mocked the old black and white movies I watched when I couldn't sleep. Her sister replied with a laughing emoji when Brenda complained about my endless stories about George. Each word was a tiny, sharp stone hitting my heart. I felt the familiar hum of my small refrigerator, a sound that usually comforted me. Now it just sounded lonely. I kept scrolling, my thumb trembling just a little. Then I saw it. The message from Brenda, an hour before, she added me. I need to add Eleanor to the chat to coordinate the wine for Christmas. She must have typed Eleanor by mistake. She didn't even know I was here, watching them carve me up with their casual cruelty. My first thought was to run to the main house, to throw the phone at my son, Mark, and scream, Look! Look what your wife says about me. I wanted to see the colour drain from Brenda's face. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I sat down on the edge of my bed, the chenille bedspread soft beneath my hands. I took a deep breath, smelling the faint scent of lavender from my sachet. Another breath. The hot, frantic hurt in my chest began to cool into something hard and clear, like ice. This wasn't a time for tears. This was a time for thinking. I opened my email on the old laptop George had bought me. I created a new address, one they would never know. Then, with steady hands, I took a screenshot of every single message. I screenshotted their jokes, their complaints, their plans for my future in a nice, clean facility. I sent every last one to my new secret email. It was a quiet declaration of war they would never hear me make. I did not leave the group chat. I just muted the notifications so my phone wouldn't buzz with their poison. I sat there for a long time, watching the dust motes dance in the afternoon sun slanting through my window. Then I picked up my phone, opened their Family Fun Planners chat, and typed. Brenda, dear, I wrote. Just saw the schedule. What time would you like me to start on the potatoes for Christmas dinner? I wasn't falling apart. I was simply falling out of their reach. My own thought surprised me with its clarity. A moment later, her reply came back, dripping with fake sweetness. Whenever you're ready, Eleanor. You are such a big help. XOXO. I looked at the message, and for the first time, I saw her not as a monster, but as a small, predictable problem. A problem that had a solution. That night, I couldn't sleep. The moon was bright outside my window, casting long shadows across the floor. Around 2 in the morning, I put on my robe and slippers, the worn fleece soft against my feet. I walked over to the main house, using the key they thought I only used for emergencies. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioning. I went straight to Mark's home office. The air smelled of stale coffee and Brenda's lemon-scented polish. I knew where he kept the important files, in a big metal cabinet. I pulled open the drawer labeled Household. Nothing. I tried Financials. Nothing. My heart started to beat a little faster. Then I saw it, a drawer near the bottom labeled Old Tax Records. I pulled it open. And there it was, a thick manila folder with my name on it, written in Mark's familiar script. I took it back to my guest house and sat at my little kitchen table. Under the glow of a single lamp, I read the agreement I had signed 5 years ago. My $500,000 contribution to the down payment. It was all there, clear as day. An investment for equity, not a gift. I took out my phone, and page by page, I took a perfect, clear picture of the entire document. Tucked in the very back, I found something else. A life insurance policy from George I had completely forgotten about, with a cash value I never knew existed. The next afternoon, Brenda knocked on my door. Her dog, a yapping little thing named Princess, was straining at a rhinestone leash in her hand. The dog always made me sneeze. "Eleanor, you're a lifesaver," she said, not waiting for me to answer. "My nail appointment got moved up, and I have a spa day right after. Could you just watch Princess for a few hours? I'd be so grateful." She was already trying to hand me the leash. I looked at her, at the leash, at the dog. I thought of the screenshots on my phone and the documents I had copied. A strange calm settled over me. It was the first test. I met her eyes and smiled a small, polite smile. "I'm sorry, Brenda," I said. "I have a prior appointment." The look of pure, unfiltered shock on her face was better than any spa day. My appointment was at the public library, in the section on tenant rights and elder law. I had some reading to do. I used some of my Social Security money to make an appointment. Not with a doctor, but with a lawyer who specialized in elder law. I found her online. Her office was clear across town, which was perfect. I put on my good coat, the one I saved for church, and put the copies of my papers in my big handbag. The bag felt heavy with secrets. As I was leaving, Brenda stopped me by the door, her arms crossed. The smell of her lemon floor cleaner was everywhere. "And where are you off to?" she asked. "I have a doctor's appointment," I said, looking right past her at the manicured lawn. "A routine checkup." Mark came out of the living room, wiping his hands on a napkin. "Do you need a ride, Mom?" "No, thank you," I said. "I'm taking the bus. I enjoy the ride." The lie felt surprisingly easy. It tasted like freedom. The lawyer's office didn't smell like old books and dust. It smelled like fresh coffee and quiet competence. The lawyer herself, Ms. Davies, was a young woman with sharp eyes and a kind smile. She wore a simple dark blue dress. She listened to my whole story without once looking at her watch. I pushed the copies of the financial agreement and the screenshots of the group chat across her polished desk. She read everything in silence, her expression unreadable. The only sound was the gentle hum of a computer and the ticking of a small clock on her shelf. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clear and direct. "Mrs. Peterson," she said, her voice calm. "They have violated this agreement in spirit and possibly in letter. You have options." A wave of relief washed over me so strong I felt dizzy. I hadn't been imagining it. I wasn't just a sensitive old woman. "I'm not asking for revenge," I told her. my voice barely a whisper. I'm just asking for my life back. Miss Davies nodded slowly. Then she leaned forward and asked me a question that chilled me to the bone. What is it you want to happen? I thought about her question for a whole week. What did I want? I didn't want to ruin them. I didn't want to be cruel. I just wanted to be free. I spent my afternoons in the guest house, listening to the sounds from the main house. I heard Brenda's sharp tone as she told Mark to take out the trash, to mow the lawn, to call the plumber. I saw my son, a grown man, scurry to do her bidding, his shoulders slumped. I saw my own future in his posture if I did nothing. One evening, I sat on my little porch, watching the fireflies blink in the twilight. The scent of my wilting tomato plants hung in the air. I closed my eyes and pictured a place where I wasn't underfoot, a place where my opinions weren't clueless ideas. That's when I knew. I wanted my investment back, every penny. I wanted my independence. And I wanted the truth to be known, not shouted in anger, but laid out plain and simple for all to see. My second test of courage came at the grocery store. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the wheels of our cart squeaked on the linoleum. Brenda was in a foul mood, sighing dramatically at the price of everything. She grabbed a large plastic box of organic kale, the kind that cost $8, and tossed it into the cart. For my smoothies, she announced to no one in particular. I stopped the cart. I reached in, picked up the expensive kale, and placed it back on the shelf. The plastic felt cold and brittle in my hand. I then picked up a bunch of regular spinach, my favorite, and put it in the cart instead. Brenda stared at me, her mouth a thin line. What do you think you're doing? I looked her right in the eye. I'll be cooking my own meals from now on. Then I pushed the cart and walked down the aisle, leaving her standing there by the leafy greens. I didn't look back to see her face. That night, I called my old friend Judith in Florida. The sound of her voice was like a warm blanket. Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. Judith, I have to tell you something, I said, and the whole story just poured out of me. The guest house, the errands, the lies about my tomatoes, the group chat. I told her about the lawyer and the spinach in the grocery store. I expected her to gasp or offer pity. She did neither. When I was finished, there was a pause on the line. Then Judith said, her voice firm and clear, "Well, it's about time, Eleanor. Now let's make a plan." We talked for an hour. She wasn't my comforter. She was my general. We talked about money, housing, and timelines. She made it all sound possible. She made me feel strong. You need to get out of there, she said. Just think about it, Elle. There's a world cruise leaving from Miami in January. 3 whole months. A cruise. The idea was so wild, so impossible. It made me catch my breath. I went online that afternoon, my fingers trembling just a little over the keyboard. I found what I was looking for on a big retail website, a portable digital projector, no bigger than a shoebox. I used my own credit card and had it sent to a post office box I'd opened in the next town over. It arrived a few days later in a plain brown box. The cardboard smelled dusty and anonymous. I drove it home and hid it deep in my closet, tucked beneath a bag of old knitting supplies George's mother had given me years ago. The yarn felt scratchy and forgotten. That night, after the main house went dark, I pulled it out. I plugged it in and aimed it at the blank wall across from my bed. The little fan inside made a soft, whirring sound. A perfect, bright white square appeared on the beige paint. I practiced for a long time, just turning it on and off, getting used to the feel of the remote in my hand. It felt like a dress rehearsal for a play only I had the script for. The next morning, I sat at my little kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop. The life insurance policy from George was laid out beside me, the paper thin and worn. It wasn't a fortune, but he had called it my adventure money. I found the website for the world cruise Judith had mentioned. My heart hammered against my ribs as I typed in my information. I booked a single cabin with a small balcony. The confirmation email arrived instantly. The subject line glowed on the screen. Your voyage awaits. It felt like a ticket to another life, a life that was still mine to claim. A wave of pure terror washed over me. What was I doing? I was 71 years old, but then I thought of the group chat, of Brenda's smug smile, of Mark's averted eyes. A different feeling, hard and cool as steel, settled in my stomach. The plan was in motion now. Christmas Day arrived, smelling of roasted turkey and pine needles. The house was filled with Brenda's family, her sister, her parents, all people who smiled at me with their teeth but not their eyes. I played my part beautifully. I was quiet, polite, and helpful, just as they expected. Brenda floated around the room in a new red dress, smug and satisfied, certain that I had finally accepted my place. I helped carry dishes from the kitchen, my back aching. "Oh, Eleanor, let me get that heavy dish for you," Brenda's sister said, her voice dripping with fake concern. I just smiled and handed her the sweet potato casserole. I endured it all, the little pats on my arm that felt more like dismissals than affection. I was a ghost at their feast, and that was just fine. It was exactly what my plan required. We all sat down for dinner. The room was warm from the fireplace and loud with chatter and laughter. The crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Mark stood up, holding his wine glass. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, beaming, "to family and to my wonderful wife Brenda for making all of this possible." Everyone cheered and clinked their glasses. I felt a single hot tear slide down my cheek, a final little grief for the family I thought I had. I wiped it away before anyone could see. I sat through the rest of the meal, eating my turkey and listening to their empty talk. Underneath the table, hidden in the folds of my cardigan, my hand closed around a small plastic remote control I had slipped into my pocket before dinner. When there was a lull in the conversation, I pushed my chair back and stood up. "I'd like to make a toast as well," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was as clear as a church bell on a Sunday morning. The whole table went quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Mark looked worried. Brenda just looked irritated that I had interrupted her party. I ignored them all, took a deep breath, and pressed the small black button on the remote in my hand. From behind the Christmas tree, a little machine I had placed there an hour before whirred quietly to life. The first screenshot appeared on the large, blank dining room wall. The light from the little projector was surprisingly bright. The words were big enough for everyone to read. It was Brenda's message to her sister. "Just added the dusty relic so she sees the cleaning schedule." A single, sharp gasp cut through the festive chatter. It came from Brenda's mother. I saw Brenda's face, which had been smiling a moment before, turn the colour of chalk. The wine glass in her hand trembled. Mark just stared, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. The smell of roast turkey and pine suddenly seemed sickeningly sweet. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my hand steady, and pressed the small black button on the remote again. A soft click, and a new message filled the wall. "She's a leech on our finances. I can't wait until we can put her in a home." Brenda's sister, Sharon, made a choking sound and coughed into her napkin. My son Mark finally looked away from the wall and stared at his wife. His mouth was hanging open, a look of pure, dumbfounded shock on his face. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the projector fan. I kept clicking the remote. One message after another. The time they mocked the sweater I wore to church. The time they called me a warden, watching their every move. The time Brenda complained about having to buy my brand of tea. The truth of the past year, all their private whispers, were now public and glowing on the wall. The room grew so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the mantelpiece. I clicked until I reached the very last screenshot I had saved. It was from Brenda to her sister just last week. He'll always be a mama's boy. But don't worry, I control the money. She'll die in that guest house. I pressed the power button. The light died, and the wall went blank. I turned and looked at my son. His eyes were filled with a strange mix of horror and shame. Then I looked at Brenda. Her face was no longer pale. It was a mask of pure fury, her lips a thin white line. She looked like she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I carefully folded my linen napkin, the one I had ironed myself 2 days before, and placed it on the table next to my untouched plate. My voice was perfectly calm when I spoke. I believe this concludes my investment in this family. I kept my eyes on Mark as I continued. My lawyer has already sent you the official notice. I am reclaiming my financial contribution to this house, as per our agreement. I took a small breath. My bags are packed. A taxi is waiting for me outside. I let that sink in for a moment before delivering the final piece. I'm leaving for a 3-month world cruise. Please don't contact me. I walked out of that dining room without another word. I did not turn my head, not even when I heard Brenda's high, sharp cry of outrage. I heard my son Mark say my name, a question in his voice. I just kept walking. The front door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the noise. The cold December air felt wonderful on my hot cheeks. A yellow taxi was waiting at the curb, just like I'd arranged. The driver nodded once, a signal that he was ready. My heart was thumping in my chest, a loud, fast drumbeat. But it wasn't fear. It was the sound of a bird taking flight. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, my little phone started to buzz in my purse. It buzzed and buzzed, a frantic, angry vibration against my leg. I knew it was Mark. I pulled the phone out. His name was lit up on the screen, bright and demanding. I looked at his name for a long moment. Then I did something I hadn't done since my husband George passed away. I held down the little button on the side until the screen went completely dark. The buzzing stopped. The silence was beautiful. I leaned my head back against the cool vinyl seat and watched the Christmas lights of the houses slide past my window, blurring into streaks of colour. I spent 2 days in a clean, simple hotel near the port. I let the storm rage somewhere else. I imagined the phone calls, the arguments, the shock waves spreading through the family. I didn't have to hear any of it. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, handled everything. She sent me a single text message that first night. It said, "They are panicking. Stick to the plan." Reading her words made me feel strong. On the 3rd day, a car came for me. The cruise terminal was a noisy, happy chaos of people. A man in a crisp white uniform took my suitcase. I walked up the gangplank, feeling the gentle sway of the ship beneath my feet. I found my cabin. It was small, with a bed and a little desk and a round window that looked out onto the water. It was all mine. The first week at sea was a blur of new things: the endless blue water, the smell of salt in the air, the gentle rocking that lulled me to sleep each night. I found a book club that met in the ship's library. It was full of women my age, women with their own stories. One of them, a retired teacher named Mary, asked me, So, Eleanor, what did you think of the ending? They all looked at me, waiting for my answer. For the first time in years, people wanted to hear my opinion. I almost forgot how to give it. One afternoon, the ship's steward brought me a printed message. It was a ship-to-shore email, forwarded from Ms. Davies. My heart gave a little jump when I saw it was from Mark. I sat on my bed, the thin paper trembling a little in my hand. I read Mark's email. He wrote that I had ruined Christmas. He said Brenda was humiliated, that her family would never speak to us again. He asked how I could do this to him, to them. He told me to come home so we could fix this mess. I read it twice, searching for two simple words. I didn't find them. There was no, "I'm sorry." There was only blame. I folded the paper neatly in half, walked over to the little trash can in my cabin and dropped it inside. Then I went to find Mary and the others for a game of cards. I explored my first port of call in Lisbon. The city was built on 7 hills, and every street seemed to be paved with beautiful, slippery tiles. I found a small cafe with a little iron table outside, warmed by the sun. I ordered a coffee, strong and black, and watched the people hurry by, their words a musical language I didn't understand. It was strange. For the first time in years, my mind was quiet. There was no running list of Brenda's errands, no worry about what mood Mark would be in, no hum of anxiety under my skin. I just sat. I sipped my coffee. Then it hit me. I hadn't thought about them for 5 whole hours, not once. The feeling wasn't anger or triumph. It was just space. A wide, open space in my head where all the worry used to be. It felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater for a very long time. This quiet, this peace, was the real treasure. I wondered if I could ever feel this way back home. But then, I wasn't sure where home was anymore. A few days later, an email came through on the ship's spotty internet. It was from my lawyer, Miss Davies. The subject line was just "Update." I opened it with a steady hand. The message was short. "Eleanor, they have accepted an offer on the house. They had no choice. They can't afford the mortgage without your capital." Well done. I felt a little pang in my chest. Not for them. Not really. It was for the house itself. I remembered planting the rose bushes by the guest house door. I remembered the spot in the kitchen where the morning sun would hit just right. A sad little ghost of the family I thought I was building. The feeling didn't last. I was walking through a market in the old part of the city, and I saw a stall selling hand-painted tiles. One caught my eye. It was blue and yellow, with a cheerful little bird on a branch. I bought it without a second thought. I didn't have a wall to hang it on yet, but I would. I held the cool, smooth ceramic in my hand. It was a promise to myself. My old friend Judith had told me her cousin was on the same cruise. "Her name is Sarah," Judith had said over the phone. "She's sharp as a tack about money. You two must meet." We arranged to have dinner in the main dining hall. The room was grand, with chandeliers that tinkled when the ship swayed. Sarah was a tall woman with short grey hair and a no-nonsense smile. "So," she said, after we ordered our fish, "Judith tells me you've had a bit of an adventure." "You could call it that," I said, liking her immediately. We talked for over an hour. I told her the whole story, leaving nothing out. She just listened, nodding. When I was done, she took a sip of her water. "Good for you," she said simply. "Now, what's your plan for the money when it comes through? If you ever want a second pair of eyes on your numbers, just let me know. Sometimes these pension companies make mistakes, especially with survivor benefits." Her question hung in the air, a practical, chilling thought I hadn't considered. The next morning, Sarah and I met in the ship's business centre. It was a small, quiet room that smelled of clean carpets and printer ink. She had me pull up my bank statements and pension documents on one of the computers. I felt a little flicker of the old helplessness, the feeling of being a clueless relic. "It's just a form, Eleanor," Sarah said gently, pointing at the screen. "You fill in the boxes. Nothing to be scared of." We went through the numbers line by line. She found it almost immediately. A small code next to my pension deposit. According to George's company policy, as his widow, I was entitled to a higher benefit than I was receiving. It wasn't a fortune, but it wasn't pocket change either. That afternoon, feeling bold, I went to the ballroom dancing class I'd seen on the schedule. I was clumsy. My partner, a kind gentleman from Ohio, was very patient. "Just relax your shoulders, Eleanor," the instructor called out. "Let the music move you." And for a moment I did. I laughed, a real deep laugh that came from my belly. I hadn't known that sound was still inside me. We docked in Rome, and the city was a beautiful, noisy chaos. I joined a tour group, and we went to see the Colosseum. I stood before it, a little speck of a person in front of so much history. The guide talked about emperors and gladiators, about empires that rose and fell right on this spot. I thought about Brenda's perfectly clean house, and Mark's worried face, and the nasty words in that group chat. From here, standing in the warm Italian sun, it all felt so small. My own little empire had fallen, but I was still standing. I was the one who got to see Rome. I bought a lemon gelato and sat on a stone bench. The cruise wouldn't last forever. Soon, I would have to decide where to go, what to do. For the first time, the thought wasn't scary. It was a question, waiting for my answer. I received the email from my lawyer while sitting in the ship's small library. The gentle rocking of the boat and the smell of old paper had always calmed me. The message was short. The sale of the house was complete. My investment, plus a little extra for my trouble, had been wired to my new bank account. I opened my banking app right there, the numbers on the screen glowing in the dim light. It was real. I was free. That afternoon, when we docked in a small Italian port, I did something I'd never done before. I walked into a fancy little shop that smelled of leather and lavender. I bought myself a silk scarf, the colour of a sunset over the water. It cost more than my entire grocery bill for a week used to. I tied it around my neck, and the fabric felt cool and smooth against my skin. It was the feeling of a promise I was finally keeping to myself. The last day of the cruise was bittersweet. I said goodbye to the women from my book club, exchanging email addresses and promising to write. Then I was on a plane. The drone of the engines a lullaby, carrying me toward my new life. When I stepped out of the airport in Florida, the warm, humid air wrapped around me like a blanket. Judith and Sarah were waiting for me right outside the baggage claim, holding a crooked, handmade sign that said, "Welcome home, Eleanor." They drove me to my new apartment in their community. It was a small, sunny unit on the second floor, overlooking a pond with ducks. They had even brought a casserole for my dinner, its savoury scent filling the small kitchen. I held the new key in my palm, its sharp edges feeling solid and real. As I turned to thank them, my heart full, I saw a man standing awkwardly by the elevator. It was my son, Mark. I told Judith and Sarah to go on up, that I would handle this. I could see the worry in their eyes, but they nodded and gave my arm a squeeze before heading inside my apartment. I walked over to Mark. He looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. His shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He started to speak, his voice cracking. "Mum, I am so sorry. Brenda was just..." She was under a lot of stress. I held up a hand, and he fell silent. The air hummed with the sound of the building's air conditioning. "I'm not interested in your reasons, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I'm interested in your actions," and they spoke for themselves. He flinched, as if I'd slapped him. "We separated," he said, looking at the floor. "After Christmas. After what you did. She couldn't handle the fallout with her family. It's over." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Mum, can I just... can I stay with you for a few days? Just to get my head on straight?" I looked past him, at the freshly painted door to my new home. I thought of the peace I felt on that ship, the simple joy of my new scarf. I thought of the welcome casserole waiting for me upstairs. "No," I said, simply and without anger. "This is my home, Mark. My sanctuary. You need to find your own." He looked completely stunned, as if the word no was in a foreign language he'd never heard before. For his entire life, my home had always been his home. I could see the confusion warring with the desperation on his face. I softened my voice, just a little. "We can talk on the phone," I offered. "Once a week. If you're serious about rebuilding something, you can start there. Call me next Sunday." He just nodded, speechless. I watched him walk back to his rental car, his shoulders slumped. For the first time, I wasn't the one left behind. I started my new life. In the community garden, I was given a small, sunny plot of my own. The Florida soil was sandy, but I worked in some good compost, and the earth felt warm and alive under my fingernails. My tomatoes grew magnificent and heavy on the vine, their skins splitting just a little in the sun. My neighbor, a retired postman named Bill, would lean over the fence. "Eleanor," he'd say, "you've got the magic touch." I'd just smile and hand him a ripe one. Twice a week, I volunteered at the local library for story time. The smell of old paper and the sound of the children's squeals when I did the voice for the big bad wolf filled a part of me I thought had gone hollow. My days were mine. They were simple, and they were full. One afternoon, after pulling a few weeds, I checked my mailbox. Tucked between a grocery flyer and a postcard from Judith was a thick envelope with an official government seal. It was from the pension board. I sat at my small kitchen table with the letter. The air conditioner hummed softly. I slit the envelope open carefully with a butter knife. The paper was heavy and official. I read it once, then twice. My friend Sarah had been right. There had been a clerical error years ago, after George passed. They confirmed I was owed nearly 2 years of back payments. It wasn't a fortune, not enough to buy a yacht or anything silly like that. But it was a comfortable cushion. It was safety. More than that, it was a sign. It felt like the universe was patting me on the shoulder, telling me I had done the right thing. I folded the letter, placed it on the counter, and looked out my window at my little patio. "Well, George," I whispered to the empty air, "looks like we're still taking care of each other." A few nights later, I was scrolling through pictures of my friends' grandchildren on my tablet when a little notification popped up. A friend request. My heart gave a little jolt when I saw the name. Brenda. Her profile picture was a heavily filtered selfie, her head tilted at an angle, a strange, serene smile on her face. Her page was full of vague, inspirational quotes. One of them read, "True strength is forgiving those who are not sorry." I looked at that for a long moment. Then I tapped the delete request button. A second box popped up, asking if I wanted to block her. I pressed block without a moment's hesitation. There was no anger, no satisfaction. It was like swatting a fly. It was simply a thing that needed to be done. Mark called every Sunday afternoon, just as I had allowed. The first few calls were stiff. He talked about the weather, about his new, smaller apartment. I told him about my garden and the library. Then, slowly, something shifted. "You're reading to kids?" he asked one week. "What book are you reading them?" I told him it was Where the Wild Things Are. There was a long pause. "I loved that book," he said, his voice softer. "You used to read it to me and do the monster roars." He was starting to remember the man he was before he met Brenda. He was starting to sound like my son again. For my 72nd birthday, I decided to host a small dinner party. Just Judith, Sarah, and a few other women from my book club. I didn't want a fuss. I made a simple roast chicken, the smell filling my small apartment. We sat around my little table, the one I'd bought at a second-hand store and painted a cheerful yellow. We drank cheap white wine from mismatched glasses and told stories. Sarah told a hilarious one about a disastrous audit she'd once conducted, and Judith recounted a time she'd accidentally entered the men's sauna at the community pool. I laughed until my sides hurt, a real deep laugh that came from my toes. This was my family now, a family of choice, not obligation. My tablet dinged with a message on the side table. I glanced at it later, after everyone had left and the dishes were done. It was from Mark. "Happy birthday, Mum. I was thinking, could I come visit you?" I thought about Mark's request for a full day. I sat in my favourite armchair, the one by the window that gets the afternoon sun, and just let the idea settle. Judith had come over with a plate of her lemon bars. "What are you going to do?" she asked, setting the plate on my little coffee table. The smell of sugar and citrus filled the air. "I'm going to say yes," I told her. Her eyebrows shot up. "But on my terms." I called him that evening. The phone felt cool and heavy in my hand. "You can come for my birthday, Mark," I said. My voice was even. "But you'll stay at the hotel down the road, the Seafoam Inn. It's very nice." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of a television. "Oh, okay, Mom, if that's what you want." "It is," I said, and that was the end of it. This was the test. Not a trap, just a simple line drawn in the sand. I wondered if he would even bother to cross it. He visited. He checked into the hotel without a single complaint. When he came to my door, he wasn't holding flowers or some big, flashy gift. He was holding a book. It was wrapped in plain brown paper. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said. He looked older. There were lines around his eyes I hadn't seen before. I unwrapped it. It was an old, out-of-print book on heritage tomatoes I'd mentioned wanting years ago. I had forgotten all about it, but he had remembered. We sat on the screened-in porch, a pitcher of iced tea between us. He didn't try to make excuses. He just looked at me, his eyes full of a sadness I recognized. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm sorry for being a coward, for my silence. I saw what was happening, and I did nothing." He finally said the words I needed to hear, not for him, but for me. I took a slow sip of my tea. The ice cubes clinked against the glass. I looked at this man, my son, and I didn't feel the old anger. I just felt a quiet sort of distance, like looking at an old photograph. "I don't say, 'I forgive you,' Mark," I told him gently. "I say, 'Thank you for that apology.'" He nodded, as if he understood the difference. We spent the afternoon talking about the weather and my garden and his new, smaller apartment. It wasn't the way it used to be. It was something new, something fragile. For the first time, I felt like I was in control. The power had shifted, and it wasn't loud or angry. It was just a quiet, settled fact. Months passed. My life fell into a simple, happy rhythm. I had my garden club on Tuesdays, my library volunteering on Thursdays, and coffee with Judith and Sarah whenever the mood struck. The sun was warm, the work was satisfying, and my days belonged to me. My weekly calls with Mark became easier. He started asking for my advice again, not about his life, but about little things. He wanted to know how to keep Basil alive on a windowsill. He told me about a movie he saw that he thought I would like. It was a slow, careful mending. A cousin from back home called one afternoon. She was full of gossip. "Did you hear?" she said, her voice buzzing with the news. "Brenda moved to another state, packed up and left. Her mother said she just couldn't stand it there anymore." I listened, holding a freshly picked tomato in my hand. It was warm from the sun. I thought of Brenda, of her sharp voice and her cold kitchen. And I realized, with a small jolt of surprise, that I felt absolutely nothing at all. I was sitting on my own balcony, in my own home, watching the sun set. The Florida sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink. A warm breeze rustled the palm fronds, a sound that I had come to love. My cup of chamomile tea was warm in my hands, and the gardening book from Mark was on the little table beside me, a pressed flower marking my page. Life was not loud. It was calm, and it was full. It was mine. My phone dinged softly, a pleasant little chime. It was a notification from a new group chat Judith had started for me, her, and Sarah. I smiled as I read the name she had chosen for us. The Undusty Relics. Below it was a picture of a cat wearing a tiny sombrero. I chuckled, a real happy sound that floated out into the quiet evening. I was at peace.